All right, I always say it. It's the best day of the week. It's Friday, and that means that we do the mailbag right here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know the deal because I talk about it every week. We take questions from the readers at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Take your questions on Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, and anything else going on in the world of Pitt sports, maybe even things outside the world of Pitt sports. We take your questions and answer as many as we can here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt. I look forward to this every week. These are a lot of fun to put together. You guys pick the topics and we talk about it. And so I appreciate everybody who submitted questions this week. We got a lot of great questions about some recruiting stuff, some questions about the linebackers, which I'm kind of excited to talk about, some questions about whether this offense can keep manufacturing comebacks if they're ever truly out of a game, which I think is a pretty interesting conversation, and a bunch of others. So let's see how many we can get to and dive into it right here on the Morning Pitt Mailbag, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, Friday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We'll get it out of the way quickly. You know what I always ask you to do. Like this video and subscribe. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you subscribe, you can turn on notifications and get an alert sent to your phone when we go live. Our live streams are always some of the most fun things we do every week, and we're going to have a live stream tomorrow night. You want to make sure you don't miss it after the Pitt Youngstown State game. I'm guessing that thing will start around 8 o'clock, the live stream. But we'll see exactly when it starts. I'll try to have an exact start time for you tomorrow. But if you subscribe, click that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and you'll get an alert. It says, "Hey, Panther-Lair is going live. You don't want to miss it, so tune in now." So that's the best way to do it, to make sure you are locked in for all of our Pitt video content here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, to get all of the Pitt sports coverage you can possibly handle. All right, let's jump in. I just want to get into the questions because we got some good ones this week. PJ Coleman 02 says, Chris, have you heard any recruiting buzz or momentum after the Backyard Brawl victory? There were a lot of visitors at that game. Yeah, there were. I think there were about 30 visitors, there were probably more than 30 high school football players at the game on the sideline before the game. There were about 30 priority guys either committed to Pitt in the 2025 recruiting class or kind of top targets for the 2026 and 2027 classes primarily. And we've got reactions from just about all of them right there at Panther-Lair.com. A lot of the responses are there in terms of when you're talking about recruiting and what the recruits thought of the game and the experience. I think the biggest, it's not like came out of that game and boy, Pitt got 5 commitments or 5 guys are just about to commit or something like that. I think the biggest impact that game had, I think when you look at the recruits who were there, a bunch of the really most notable guys were local prospects, Western PA guys in the 2026 or 2027 classes. And those guys are interesting and notable. And I think it's important to get those kinds of players to a game like that, to an atmosphere like that. Because look, we've talked about this for a long time. Like, you have to consider what Pitt is in the view of local recruits, local prospects. We talk so often about local recruits versus out-of-state recruits and why Pitt seems to have more success recruiting out of state than they do with the local guys. And I think to some extent, the local guys see it all up close. A lot of local recruits have been going to Pitt games since they were in 6th grade or something. So they've been going for the past 6 years or so. Or less, or 5 or 4 years, depending on what grade they're in now, 3 years. But if they've been going to games for the past 4 or 5 or 6 years, they've seen some Pitt crowds that were not like the crowd you saw on Saturday. They've seen some Pitt crowds that were probably more like the crowd you're going to see tomorrow, and even smaller. They've seen Acrisure Stadium, Nee Heinz Field, or Nay Heinz Field, however you pronounce that little N-E-E. They've seen that stadium half full or 2/3 full. And it's not a great atmosphere when that's the case. Now, I mean, there have been times where a 45,000, person crowd has had a great atmosphere. I mean, we've seen that happen, but a lot of times it's not a great atmosphere. A lot of times it leaves a little something to be desired. And those recruits have been coming to those games and seeing that atmosphere and experiencing it. And so I think it's important to get those guys to Acrisure Stadium for a game like that. And I've said this for years, as a way to say, look, this is what it can be. Okay? This is what it can be. When it's good, when we are good, like, if you're the Pitt coaches, you say, when we are good, when we're winning, when we play these big games, this place can have an atmosphere that rivals any of the other places that you're looking at. Okay? come and be a part of this. And you can help us win and get to this level and playing in this kind of environment every week. Now, is it going to be 68,000 or 65,000 people every week? Probably not. But it can be a good environment. And so I think that's the real highlight of a game like that. It doesn't necessarily, lead to instant commitments or something, along those lines. But what it does is it showcases the potential. Okay? Because if you're a young kid and you've gone to a handful of games there and the atmosphere was just okay, chances are you might think that that's all it can be. But that's not the case. It can be better. It can be really good. It can rival some of the great atmospheres in college football. And so that's what that game gives you an opportunity to do. It's what it gives you an opportunity to showcase is how good it can be. And I think that's especially relevant for local recruits. So, that's the momentum and the buzz. And when you saw some of the comments that we posted, a lot of guys talked about it. That was the best atmosphere I've ever seen at that stadium. It was a great environment. The crowd was wild and all those things, in addition to the excitement of the game and the big win and how they came back and everything like that. So that's where I think the buzz and the momentum really is just showcasing the potential that lies within that stadium on the North Shore. Smenges asks, considering that Eli Holstein had mentioned interest in Pitt based on the 2021 ACC championship season and Kenny Pickett's success, which other non-local guys on the roster stand out as products of the 2021 title run? So, there's the old thing when you talk about recruiting, right? Like you talk about what is this current season impacting? In this current season, so take like right now, for example, 2024 football season, probably not going to have a huge impact on the class that they're currently recruiting. They're currently recruiting the 2025 recruiting class. Those are the guys who are the seniors right now. They'll graduate, some in December, most in June, and they'll enroll as freshmen for the 2025 football season. So first of all, set yourself in that mindset, okay? It's not the 2024 recruiting class that is getting recruited right now. Those guys are freshmen right now. Sincere Edwards, Francis Brew, they are the 2024 recruiting class. So right now, you're working on the 2025 recruiting class, okay? But the thing is, that class is going to be impacted less by this season than you probably think. Unless there's something drastic, national championship or the coach gets fired, this class is probably not going to be impacted all that much. What you do this year is probably not going to show up in the results of the 2025 recruiting class. Where it will really make the impact is with that next class. In 2026 recruiting class, and when we talk about the recruiting bump and recruiting buzz and recruiting push and where one season really pays off, it's usually that next class. So when we talk about the 2021 season, what recruiting class did it really have its biggest impact on? It wasn't necessarily the 22 class, which is the class they were recruiting during that season, but more so it was the 2023 class. And so when you look at that class, I think there's four guys in particular you would point to that you would say Pitt winning the ACC championship and having the success they had probably, it went a long way in landing most of the guys in the 2023 class. But the highlights are Isaiah Neal, Kenny Johnson, Jordan Bass, and Rasheem Biles. Obviously Braylon Lovelace, but you're talking about non-local guys. BJ Williams would be another one, a guy who started as a true freshman last year and continues to play this year. Cruz Brookins has been really good from that class, but he, again, a local guy. But when you're talking about Isaiah Neal, you're talking about Jordan Bass, you're talking about Rasheem Biles, you're talking about Kenny Johnson. These are non-local guys who were recruited, and they all committed in June of 2022. So for those guys, the most recent memory of Pitt football on the field was winning the ACC championship or maybe playing in the Peach Bowl. So when you talk about like where was the impact, what recruits did that season impact, it's those guys. It's that class that they were able to land. So, I think those are the players that it influenced the most. I think it helped with getting like Keaton Slovis as a transfer. I think it helped with getting Kanate Mumfield as a transfer. Actually, when you talk about guys on the roster, Kanate Mumfield absolutely came to Pitt, even without Mark Whipple and Kenny Pickett, saying, okay, here's an offense that obviously, they highlighted Jordan Addison. He was expecting to play with Addison, ended up being the replacement for Addison. Didn't really get an opportunity to show what he could do over the last 2 years, but I think he's showing it this year. So I think there's a decent number of guys here that I think you would draw a mostly straight line from the ACC championship run to their presence on the on the current roster, I should say. And guys who are making an impact, in some cases a big impact this year. And so those would be a handful that would stick out to me. Big Show 2000 says, 2-part question. 1, better linebacking core this year or the 2021 version? Might not be able to fairly assess it just yet since all these guys are still young, but man, are they good already and figure it'll only get better. 2, if we were down 3 touchdowns late in the third quarter and Cignetti's calling the plays, how many times do you think we go jumbo package with 6 offensive linemen as we try and mount our comeback? Same question, but down 10 with 5 minutes left in the fourth. My guess is 20. Okay, well, I'll answer the second question first. Like, ha, I get it. Funny, 6-0 lineman, jumbo package, even though you're down double digits and 3 touchdowns. And all. Like, no, Cignetti would not have gone jumbo package in those situations. I mean, it's funny, but he wouldn't, okay? And that wasn't really the flaw in Frank Cignetti's offense. The flaw was an underdeveloped, ineffective passing game. And Pitt would not have stood a chance to come back from being down 3 touchdowns, in the final 20 minutes or down 10 points in the final 5 with the passing game that Frank Cignetti put on the field. Never mind the quarterbacks that he was working with, particularly Phil Dracovic, but the offense just wasn't built to do that. It wasn't designed well enough. It wasn't executed well enough. It wasn't called well enough to do it. So it wouldn't have been, they would have had no chance to come back in those games, I think. I mean, the chance would have been like 1%. But not because they would have had jumbo packages on the field all the time, but because the offense just wasn't all that effectively designed. And so that's why. It's not about jumbo packages. To your first question, which I think is far more interesting and much less of making a funny, better linebacking core this year or 2021. So I went back and looked at 2021 just to refresh my memory on who they had. Servassier Dennis obviously leading the way, leading tackler for that team with 87 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks and an interception, and a fumble recovery and a block kick. John Patrician was on that team. He was third on the team in tackles with 74. He had 7.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, 3 interceptions, which is pretty remarkable. Phil Campbell and Cam Bright then kind of rounded out the 4-man rotation. Campbell had 68 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. Bright had 58 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and 3.5 sacks. After them, Brandon George played, Chase Pine played, Wendell Davis played for 8 games and then left the team. But your main 4 really were Dennis, Patrician, Campbell, and Bright. Right now, Pitt, and Pat Narduzzi talked about this yesterday. Pitt's got 3 really good linebackers they feel great about in Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, and Brandon George. And those are the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th leading tacklers on this roster right now, respectively. Lewis has 2.5 tackles for loss and a sack. So does George, 2.5 and 1. Biles has 5 tackles for loss and 2.5 sacks. Braylon Lovelace is kind of the 4th guy there. Started off as a starter for the first 2 games. He moved to the bench in the West Virginia game, is probably going to be there. I would assume he'll continue working off the bench because Biles is playing at a really high level right now. Key Thompson would be another guy who would be in the mix, but he got hurt, I think, in the Cincinnati game, didn't play against West Virginia. And so that's kind of your 5-man rotation. Jordan Bass being the number 6 guy there. It's close. There was a lot of experience on that 2021 roster, more than this year's group has. But I think Lewis and Biles, in terms of the outside linebackers being explosive, athletic playmakers, exciting players who can really make a lot of plays, who can do a whole lot, I think that might put this year's group over the edge in terms of potential. They're not there yet. I'm not going to sit here after 3 games and say that they're ahead of where Servassier Dennis and Phil Campbell and John Patrician and Cam Bright were after 14 games. Now, 6 games in, 8 games in, 12 games in, maybe we'll have a different conversation. I think the potential is there for this year's group to be better. I think, if you go man-to-man, I think I'd probably take Dennis over George. Then you look at the outside linebackers, Patrician and Bright and Campbell versus Lewis and Biles and Lovelace. I think the upside is greater with this group. They haven't achieved it yet, not for falling short or underachieving, but just because it's only been 3 games. But I think the potential and the upside are greater with this group than that year's team. Hail to Knowledge wants to know, will Pitt have the stones to hire Jim Tressel as athletic director when YSU comes to town? No, they'll probably do it on the off week. They wouldn't do it, during the game. That would detract from the student athletes. Thunder Pit Road says, what deficiencies in the defense so far do you think are the most correctable? It's probably like the details and assignments and responsibilities with the linebackers. To a lesser extent, the secondary behind them. But, just the kind of like, here's where you got to line up. Here's where you got to go. And those things that sort of only take time. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to get it instantly. It's going to take time. Even Servassier Dennis, as good as he was, when he was first playing, he made a lot of mistakes. And I think that's natural. I think by midseason, these guys will be much better. You see where they are after 3 games, and it's pretty good. I think after 6 games, it'll be even better. After 9, even better. And after 12, you're going to be like, wow. If all 3 of these guys, Biles, Lewis, and George don't end up on, one of the 3 all ACC teams, it's going to be a tragedy. I'm not saying that right now, but I think we'll be saying that after 12 games. Just because with every snap, with every drive, with every quarter, half, and game, they're getting more experience. They're gaining more knowledge, and they're getting smarter and getting a better understanding of the game. So they've got that athleticism and speed and explosiveness and all that, and now they're adding and I think they have instincts as well and IQ, but they're adding the experience and the reps and seeing it, so they get a better idea of what they need to do and where they need to be and how they need to execute. And so I think that's the easiest one to, I wouldn't even say correct, but just to improve at. I think we'll see that happen. It's going to be more interesting, I think, to watch what happens with the defensive line and what kind of improvements they can make, because I'm not as sure about, inexperience being the issue there. I think they have to show that they're good enough to make a positive impact. Hoya Panther says, 2 questions. Will Pitt find the NIL resources to keep Holstein if he continues playing like this? And since you're a Pitt grad, how do you not cheer for the Panthers? I get being a journalist, but you spent 4 years in Oakland. That's got to mean something, right? It was probably more than 4 years in Oakland. I only lived in Oakland for... Actually, I lived in Oakland for 4 years. Come to think of it, I lived in the Towers freshman year. I lived on Parkview Avenue sophomore and junior year. I think I moved to Squirrel Hill senior year, and then had to do one more semester, and I moved back and lived on like Ward Street for that last semester because I had to finish up some credits. I think I finished them up in the fall of well, we won't get into years, but it's not that hard not to cheer for a team. Like, it's really not. I think if you approach it professionally, you approach it like, how can I sit here and cheer? I've got to make notes and document what's happening and talk as objectively as possible about what we're seeing, And like, so, you mentioned about being a Pitt grad. I'll be honest. I think I went to Pitt. No question about that. Obviously that's factual. But when you think about things that would like create biases or allegiances or things like that, there's a lot I think that go into it particularly when you do this job. And I think a lot of Rivals publishers have, we cover recruiting too, right? We cover the team, but we cover recruiting. And over the course of recruiting, we get to know these players. We get to know their families sometimes. We get to know them as recruits. We see them come into college. Like Brandon George is on the screen, right? I remember talking to Brandon George coming out of high school. That was like 7 years ago. Maybe 8 years ago that I first interviewed Brandon George. It goes back that far, 7-8 years. Okay. So not like we're best friends or something like that, but like that's a long time. And I've watched him go through his career. I've seen him go through ups and downs on the field, off the field, playing like fullback at times. And so there's a little bit of a personal connection there, even if it's not like, we're sending each other Christmas cards. I know him a little bit. He's not just a jersey number on the field. He's a kid I talked to in high school when he was literally just a kid. He's an adult now, but he was just a kid. And seeing him go through that growth process, and now this year where it's finally paying off and it's working out, you're like, yeah, you feel good for him on a personal level, on a human level. You're like, yeah, good for Brandon George, man. Like, good for you recovering a block punt and scoring a touchdown. Like, good for you. Because you know what? A lot of people did count you out, and you never really got a shot. There were other players. There were probably better options all along, throughout the last 5 years. But now you're getting that shot. And so, like, am I fist pumping when Brandon George returns a punt return for a touchdown? No. But am I thinking like, good for him, man? Yeah. More than I'm thinking like, as a Pitt grad, go Brandon, fight on for dear old Pittsburgh or something like that. And it's the same. I mean, like, it's the same way with like coaches, right? I mean, you get to know coaches. You work with them. You see them. Training camp. You're seeing them every day. Back when Dave Wanstead was here and we covered like every minute of practice. I mean, you would see those guys for hours on end, and you get to know them a little bit, right? And so you've got that. Again, I don't want to overstate it and say personal relationship because it's not what it is. But you do get to know them on something of a human level. And I think when you're removed from it, right? And whether it's as a fan or there are some in sports media who don't cover games, don't go into the locker room. It's fun, when you just cover it from afar, everything is just sort of it's like a fantasy player or a video game or something. And there's no actual like human connection, because what would there be? On the screen you see number 9 and number 12, and that's all they are. It's number 9 and number 12. Number 9 made a play. Number 12 made a play. That's it. There's the coach. This is that coach. This coach coaches this position, and this position gave up a touchdown. This coach stinks. Well, he should be fired, right? And I think it's easy to do that when you're removed from it. You know what I mean? When you're not like actually there, and like you notice a different tone with people who cover sports when, again, like in the locker room, and we're not in the locker room. Pitt's locker room is not open, but you notice a different tone from say hockey writers, right? Because hockey writers are in the locker room, and there's a human connection there. And I'm not like bashing hockey writers, but if you sit there if let's say you're a hockey writer. Like hypothetically speaking, you're a hockey writer, right? And you cover, let's pick a good example here. The Blue Jackets. Okay, you cover Columbus, all right? And you're in the locker room all the time. I mean, you're going to have some kind of a personal connection. Again, you're not best friends, but you've got a personal connection. You have a human connection with these people, and you see them as humans. And so it's harder for you to sit back and be like, this dude sucks. Has he ever even put on skates before? Have you ever touched a hockey stick? This guy's the worst player I've ever seen in my life. This is a joke. You should not even be playing JV hockey or something like that. Well, it's a little bit harder to say that when you have human interactions with these people. Now, if that same hockey writer sits back and watches the Ohio State game and sees a wide receiver drop a pass, has this dude even touched a football before in his life? God, what a joke. Well, it's because you don't have that human connection. Now, you'd like to think that hockey writer who covers the Blue Jackets, who has that human interaction with a player, would have the presence of mind to draw a connection. Like, you know what? All of these people are actually people. And even though we commodify them, our connection to them is that they play this sport that we watch. We do end up making them into a almost sort of non-human commodity. And there's a lot of reasons for it, and we could get off in even more of a, disconnected tangent than we're already on. But you would like to think that a writer who covers one sport and sees the human connection there and has that human interaction would then also carry that perspective over to other sports. But that doesn't always seem to be the case. Just watch Twitter during a Pitt game, right? So there's that as well. You do have that, and that probably again plays stronger than fight on for dear old Pittsburgh. And then the last thing I would say on this, and then I'm going to move on. And again, none of those things that I just said affect the way I write about the team. Maybe it affects how I talk about it a little bit. If only because I'm not going to sit here. I don't sit here. Like, I'm not going to sit here if an offensive tackle keeps getting beat and giving up sacks, I'm not going to sit here and be like, this dude sucks. He's a terrible football player and he should never be out there again. Okay, I'm not going to do that. Partially because I just think you're being a jerk. But secondly, because there is that human thing. But then the one other thing that sort of probably weighs on my mind more than my status as an alum is right here, Panther-Lair.com. And not the site as a whole necessarily, not the subscriber base, which obviously is boosted when the team does well or sometimes when they don't do well and there's a coaching change. But not just that, but the message boards. And I've said this before, and it's the honest to God truth. There have been on more than one occasion, I've been watching a game, either at the game or covering a road game here from the Panther-Lair studios, and something will happen, and I'm not joking. The first thing that pops into my head is, oh God, the boards are going to blow up over that one. I mean, really, like that is something that pops into my head more than, as a Pitt alum, I can't believe they tried that play on fourth down. Down 21 with 20 minutes left to go in the Cincinnati game. I'm thinking about, boy, the message boards are going to be on fire for the next week as a dumpster fire, not in the good way. More than I'm thinking about, like, boy, as a Pitt alum, I'm embarrassed of this. So, long-winded answer there, but you touched. I wouldn't say touched a nerve, but touched on something I've thought about a lot. Because I want to be as objective as possible in my coverage. Your other question: will Pitt find the NIL resources to keep Eli Holstein if he continues playing like this? It's going to be interesting to see what happens after the season. If he keeps this up, obviously teams are going to try to poach him. Look, here's the reality with Pitt and NIL and retaining players and adding players. Okay. Almost everybody takes a discount. Almost everybody. Now, part of that is due to the NIL resources. Okay. Part of that, and there, I think there's a positive way to spin this, and I shouldn't say spin, there's a positive way to look at it. Connections, relationships, trust between the coaching staff, football and basketball, between the coaching staff and the players. The players are willing to take a little bit less in NIL to be in these situations, to play for these coaches and these programs. Okay? And I think that's not an unimportant point. So if Eli Holstein blows up this year, and there will be lots of opportunities for him to go elsewhere, if there will be lots of NIL, like I say, opportunities. Let's just say it that way. I think we all understand the situation. I think Pitt will be able to be competitive. I don't think Pitt will be, I think there will be greater NIL offers out there. And so it'll be a question of sticking with the coaches and the program who gave him this opportunity to this point. And if he goes, he goes. And if he stays, he stays. But I mean, we're getting way ahead of ourselves. But I mean, I think, it is relevant to consider what has been sort of the historic trajectory of Pitt's NIL program in the last few years. All right, last one. A.S. Daniels asks, for years I felt the defense was increasingly throughout the season will lock down when required. Only 2 Narduzzi seasons have I felt at times that the offense was capable of finishing off any game when required. Both were the ACC championship game years. 3 games in, I've been getting that feeling. Do you have that feeling yourself? If not, what would it take to get there? Well, what's interesting about that, I mean, 2018, obviously they went 7-7. And 2021, they lost to Western Michigan. And so they did seem to have that feeling of being able to finish off games. But they never did what this team has done. Neither one of those teams did in the 28 games that those teams played. None of them did what this team has done twice so far. Now, that's not to say this team is better than those teams. That's not to say this team is more capable than those teams. That's not to say that this team will equal those teams' success. Nobody asked me this week if my expectations have changed, but if they did, I would say, no, I'm going to stay with 8 wins for now. I'm still kind of holding the line on the 8 wins just because. So I'm not going to put this team on those teams' levels, and those teams were on different levels, so we say levels plural. But what I will say is this team has shown a whole hell of a lot in terms of resolve, in terms of ability, in terms of belief and confidence, and there's a lot going right for this team right now. And to go out and do what they've done in the last 2 weeks, to take care of business like they have in the last 2 weeks, with the pieces that are emerging, things are very interesting. Let's say that. Things are very interesting. And like, no, you would like to think they won't be down 21 with 20 minutes to go. You would like to think they won't be down 10 with 5 minutes to go. But everybody on the schedule that they're going to face this year is going to know, look out. This team can do it. And Pitt, no matter what situation they're in, is going to know, look out, we can do it. Just like you and I, no matter what situation Pitt is in, is going to know to look out because they can do it. So we'll see where they go from here, but they've shown a whole lot so far. All right, great questions. Look at that. We got over a half hour on this one. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a great Friday for sure. Thanks, everybody who submitted the questions. Don't forget, we will be live tomorrow night, targeting around 8 o'clock, but we'll let you know exactly what time we're going live for the post-game show. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, though, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, you can turn on notifications to get an alert every time we go live, and that way you won't miss any of our live content right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Whether it's the post-game show, the Wednesday night live stream, or anything else that we do. So like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, for lots of coverage heading into the weekend and, of course, throughout the game on Saturday and beyond. It should be a lot of fun. We'll see you at Acrisure Stadium on Saturday. We'll talk to you for the live show tomorrow night. In the meantime, enjoy your Friday. Have a great time at the game, and we'll catch up with you for the Panther-Lair post-game show tomorrow night right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.